Welcome once again to another edition of Working with Gen Z. Friends, in season one, we explored a topic and a episode where we talked about the importance of having mentors and coaching for the young Gen Zs who are entering the workforce. We explored to see that what is the benefit of having a good mentor? What's the benefit of having a good coach? What's the distinction between two? How can a Gen Z actually get a mentor or a coach? What do they need to do, right? And what are the responsibilities of a mentor and a coach? While coaching and mentoring has been a concept which has been there and lots of organizations have been implementing it, in the early 90s, there was another concept that came about, which was actually created by the late Jack Welch. It's called reverse mentoring. And this came about in the context when he saw some of his executives were actually not very tech savvy, something that he found out that perhaps the younger managers in the system can be of help to the more senior managers. And that became the new term called the reverse mentoring. And since the term has been out, there has been a lot of organizations who have implemented it, but the question can become, is it become as mainstream as the traditional form of mentoring and coaching? Today, we have a guest who's spent many years of her career in the HR world, and very fortunate also to have kind of been and done a reverse mentoring kind of a position. So maybe we'll be tapping on her to see what it's all about, what are some of the do's and don'ts and all aspects of it. And for that, I want to welcome my guest, Manisha Goel. Manisha, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nikhil. Really looking forward.
Excellent. And so, friends, as we've done with all our episodes, I want to briefly read Manisha's great background. Manisha is a seasoned HR colleague with 20 years of diverse experience. She joined Honeywell in 2003 from campus and has played multiple HR leadership roles across Honeywell business in both India and the APAC region. She's a leader who firmly believes in collaborative and accountability mindset and was recently heading the HR function of the Honeywell Technology Solutions in India. Manisha has extensive experience in driving large CNB transformation projects, designing business-centric talent solutions, engaging multi-generational and hybrid workforce, and creating a strong and diverse inclusive culture. With 2 decades of enriching experience of Honeywell, Manisha is now on a new consulting journey with a vision to drive strong business impact and across organization. She's an alumnus of the Presidency College, Kolkata, and has done MBA both in HR and finance from the SCM HRD in Pune. Manisha is married to her best friend and also a proud mother of a teenager. Manisha, welcome once again, and it's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Nikhil.
Lovely. So, Manisha, before we dive into my questions on reverse mentoring, just anything else that you want to share about you that I haven't kind of read through your rich bio? I know you kindly kept it and you made it brief, but anything else that our viewers would want to know about you?
I think, Nikhil, you have summarized it very, very well. I would just want to add one point that I joined Honeywell from campus. And I have grown professionally and personally in that organization. But having 2 decades of rich experience, now I'm really looking forward to leverage my expertise and drive larger impact across organization. So yeah, that's what I would want to say about myself. And thanks, Nikhil, once again for inviting me to the discussion. Really hoping to have a very good, engaging discussion around reverse mentoring.
Lovely. So we'll get right to it. And it speaks a lot, Manisha, as you say, having spent 2 decades about, the amount of experience that you got, and we're ready to tap on that. So let's start. We're going to start, since we're going to focus on reverse mentoring, I want to start by just something very basic. Help us. And since our focus is Gen Z and all the different stakeholders of Gen Z, let's start with the very basic and kind of a fundamental question. What is reverse mentoring? And how is it different from the traditional mentoring that most of us, perhaps in the HR or learning space, are familiar with?
Okay, so maybe what I will do, I'll start with the most familiar one, the traditional mentoring,
Sure.
which we all kind of do it across organization. So if you look at from a very definition of mentoring, it talks about someone who is very seasoned, a senior leader, kind of shares his knowledge, his skills, and his experience to a younger employee. And it can come with different reasons, right? You may want a growth of an employee, you want a promotion, you want a retention. There are different reasons why you set up a mentoring discussion or the overall mentoring program. Now, if they just reverse the concept, right? Instead of a seasoned HR or business leader, it is more of a young talent who is kind of sharing his skills, his knowledge, or his experience to a seasoned leader. So that's how the concept gets reversed, and we call it reverse mentoring. It has also evolved because of the changes in the organization dynamics, the changes in the organization demographics, and the changes in the skill set, where organizations started realizing that there are a younger group of employees who are much more proficient or much more expert in a certain field, which the leaders are not. And that's how the entire concept started. Couple of difference I would want to mention in between a traditional mentoring and a reverse mentoring is a reverse mentoring is more subject oriented. It is not like a generic discussion where a young talent goes and start talking to a leader. It's more of a subject oriented, where as an organization we identify a subject and we want leaders to learn from the younger population. And basis my experience, Nikhil, I have also seen that reverse mentoring most of the time is one-to-many, which means that a young talent doing a session for the larger group of leaders, while there are one-on-one discussions as well, but in most of the time it is a one-to-many, which kind of scenario happens. So that kind of sums up that what do we mean by reverse mentoring.
Sure. Excellent. And this was very helpful to understand, just to lay the foundation. One clarification here, Manisha, when you say one to many, is it one to understand that you have on one end, on this end, the junior employee who could be playing the role of a mentor to many senior leaders? Am I correct? Rather than the traditional one-to-one, where I have a coach and someone is a coachee, or I'm a mentor, someone is a mentee, right? I could probably, let's say if I'm the young NZ, I could have a half a dozen senior executives from across function. I just wanted to just clarify that one to many is just.
So the way it works is it's not that in a one-to-many kind of a setup. You formally assign leaders, right? So it does not happen as a formal assignment saying that, okay, these are 10 leaders, I'm assigning this to a young mentor. In a one-to-many, it is more of, suppose I have some young talent, it can be one or two talent who are very good, taking technology, like a drone technology, right? Someone who is very good in drone technology, have done a lot of reading and have done a lot of work, maybe some experimentation work, and which is very nascent from a business perspective, right? So we kind of call those young talent and say that, can you help us do a session with a group of senior leaders? Okay, because as an organization, we are trying to foray into drone technology, and drone technology is just an example. It can be any other latest technology or a skill set. So that's how a one-to-many arrangement works.
Okay. So that's helpful. We'll explore more on the dynamics or the nuts and bolts of how do we take it further from that setting. Now, I want to also ask you, thank you for the basic definition of just helping us to understand the distinction. Now, why should a company implement kind of a reverse mentoring, right? I mean, we were taught in our MBA schools, but as a practitioner for more than 2 decades, what's the benefit, right? Why should firms do this? Because again, many firms probably know about it, yet may not have either taken the step or the courage or the bandwidth or whatever the reason may be. But then there are others who have actually made it happen. So what's the benefit to the company in actually doing something like this?
So maybe before I answer that question, I'll take a step back, Nikhil, and then maybe talk a bit about some of the data points, right?
Sure.
In one of the latest global survey, it was mentioned that if you look at specifically Generation Z, okay, they are close to 30% of the world population, okay, and 25% of them are in workforce. And if you look at organization, and especially if you look at an IT organization or a technology organization, a Gen Z plus a young talent with 3 to 5 years of experience, maybe around 30 or 35% of the organization, right? When you have such a large group, then from an organization perspective, it becomes very, very important that what kind of talent programs, talent initiative, what you are running, which will also help in the larger engagement and retention. So the way I would kind of position it, that reverse mentoring actually becomes one of those many such initiatives, okay, which today organizations are really looking forward, saying that, how do I manage the overall engagement of my changing demographics? And in terms of specifically looking at the benefits of reverse mentoring and why it should become very, very important for an organization, I would say there are three things, and this is primarily basis my experience, Nikhil. One, this kind of initiative helps to drive a very strong, inclusive, and diverse culture in the organization, right? If we look at that young population, right, they are hungry about being heard. They are hungry about setting up their identity, right? And when organizations have this kind of programs where they are leveraging their skill set for the larger leadership team, I would say it brings in a certain kind of psychological safety within them, right? And which results in higher productivity and performance. So one, from a culture perspective, it becomes very important. Secondly, as an organization, I would say that it has actually become a learning tool, right? It's just that it's an intergenerational learning tool where instead of, a trainer from outside or always the leaders who comes and kind of coaches us, it becomes a young talent who start training or coaching, your leadership team. So that's how I would look at as an intergeneration training tool. And thirdly, I would say this also becomes important for our leaders, okay, to understand the pulse on the ground. Because see, when you are interacting so closely, and so openly with the younger talent, it also helps you understand how they're thinking, what are their thought process, what are their priorities. So you kind of drive a larger collaborative culture in the organization. So I think from an organization perspective, that's why it becomes important that how they keep on investing in such initiatives for larger engagement of young talent, plus where even the senior leaders gets benefited.
Yeah, absolutely. No, well said. I think all 3 points make good sense in terms of why one should look at it from inclusive perspective, trying to get a pulse on the ground, and what does that generation think? And I like the data point you mentioned because, and at least in the Indian context, Manisha, our demographics are tilted towards, we're still a very young country in terms of, the population that is available for working, right? So I think it's even more incumbent that maybe the senior leaders know what inspires them. And which is very, perhaps in the Indian context, again, I would say perhaps, a different story when you think about urban India versus a tier 2 city versus a tier 3 cities, right? So excellent. Now let's go right kind of dive deeper into the trenches. You've obviously been in an organization where this kind of a reverse mentoring program is something that you've led or managed. What are some of the perhaps hurdles or challenges that one can expect or one should foresee as you think about going about it? That's one part of it. And second is that how can you kind of overcome it? So it's one thing to say, yeah, it sounds all very nice and beautiful on a concept, but in a large organization, right, any change transformation takes a huge amount of effort, right? And there's always data that says that more and more companies struggle to bring about change. So anyway, I'd be curious to know, what can you share there?
I know because it is very easy to talk about initiatives, but it is very difficult when it comes for the implementation and the sustenance, right? So from a reverse mentoring perspective, Nikhil, a couple of things what I would want to highlight. See, I see this initiative because it is very close to my heart. I see this initiative as something which drives a cultural change in the organization. Okay. So from that perspective, the openness in terms of driving that change and benefiting from the program is very, very important. And when I say openness, Nikhil, I'm not referring to leaders. I'm also referring to the younger talent. Both should kind of, understand, okay, that this is something we would want to run because it's like it takes two to tango, right? And in this case, the involvement for the leaders as well as for the younger generation is equally important. So I would say that openness in terms of driving such initiative becomes very, very important. It should not become like a tick in the box activity. Okay, so I am X organization, I am launching reverse mentoring. Wow. What after that? So it should not be like that. So that way, I think that open discussion as a leader of the organization, you should facilitate saying that, hey, do you really have a need? Okay. And then only get into that. That is one. Secondly, the intent, what you're driving and the impact you want to create has to be very, very clear, right? Because, if you do not have a very clear intent, okay, because such program would require a lot of strong branding, lot of strong communication, and you need to be as an organization very clear why are you doing it. Like, and especially when we talk about reverse mentoring, we are talking about an area where we would want something which the senior leaders are not very good at, right? Or something where then we need to develop further. So I would say that, we need to be very clear about what intent we are driving. And the most practical way would be to have brainstorming sessions along with senior leaders, right? Saying that, okay, what are the topics? What are the things where you need help? And because it's not that they're zero and you have to start from zero. It's more of, how do we make them much more acute? How we make them more and more relevant to the latest things, right? That's how we're looking at it. We are not saying that, okay, I as a senior leader, I don't know anything and I'm getting a young talent to teach me, right? Okay, it's not like that. So I think a brainstorming session along with the leaders to understand the areas what we would want to target. And that's how the mentoring happens. It can be a one-on-one, it can be a one-to-many. That becomes equally important. That's the second thing. So the first one I said, having that openness in terms of having the program. Second is very clearly laying down, okay, this is my intent and this is the impact that I would want to drive, and get the right parties involved in the discussion. And the third thing, which I feel is always very important, is the sustenance. Because again, it's very easy to do the first session. It is very easy to do the first batch. But how do you continue to have that rigor in the organization and start seeing the benefit of the program, right? There, the sustenance piece becomes very, very important. And this is my experience, Nikhil. I have always felt that even if it's talent, okay, it is always better not to make it a HR-led initiative, okay? It has to be an initiative where business co-partner. And in such case of reverse mentoring, my suggestion would be you create a reverse mentoring champion and give that ownership to that young group, saying that, okay, as an organization, we are running this program and you become owner of that group. They feel empowered, they feel excited, and they help you run and sustain the program and do the right amount of branding, okay? So my suggestion would be that, if we can look at it in a very creative way rather than a traditional implementation of a program, it can give you much better results. I hope I have answered your question.
Yeah, no, I think you have some excellent points, and I particularly like that last point. And I was recently watching a video from Simon Sinek where he talks about that in a normal culture change, you have a bell curve, right? Where you have always the 10% who are on board, and you have your 10% who are the laggards. The challenge of the organization is always to move the 75% in the middle from who are on the fence. And therefore, can you make the 10 or the 15% the champions? And he talks about a story where we will actually take these people and let them be our ambassadors and let them kind of drive. So when they see their peers doing it, I think the shift in the middle starts happening. So no, I think they are all excellent points. One question I had, Manisha, I just want to build on that, was that again, what do you do from all your experience? I mean, if you have a company where the senior leaders presumably are of an open mind and they don't mind this idea. But sometimes, as we all know, that, the higher up we go, the bigger the ego can become. And therefore, there can be the view that, this is good in a textbook. My question to you is that, from your experience, did you find any resistance, or what were the ways in which you were influencing the business, right? Because I also like your point about this has to be a business-led initiative, not just an HR-led initiative, right? Because that's how they have the skin in the game. But more curious to know, because I think the younger Gen Zers are quite happy to start talking about new platforms, but on this side, how do we make sure? So I'm curious to know, is it generally that is there some resistance, or how do we influence them? Just curious to know anything that you can share there.
Yeah, and this is a very common thing, right? When we launch any such initiative or program, I would say not, I would not say it's in form of resistance, but in terms of either a participation or a lot of questions, right? When we are into the program. My take in this entire thing, Nikhil, should be all these things should be done before you launch. There is no point getting into all this after launch, right? Then you have not done your homework well. Okay. So even for the leadership team, like, and we are also part of the leadership team, right? So when we're like sitting together and when the idea comes up saying, I need to do a reverse mentoring in the organization, there has to be a reason why you're doing it, right? And that business case should be very strongly laid out in front of the leadership team, like, saying that, okay, what do I gain out of it? How I drive it, what would be its importance, how will it help us, how will it help the younger talent, how will it help the seasoned leaders. I think those things has to be very clearly communicated and the business case, a burning platform, right? Before the launch of the session, I would say. See, after the launch, you may have, very operational issues in terms of time. So that ego should not come. If there is an ego, that has to be ironed out before. Okay. Because then you don't need that initiative in the organization. As I said, it should not be tick in the box activity, right? But yeah, there are a lot of operational issues where it comes into time, right? People are traveling, people are busy with multiple priorities, and you're not able to. So you may be wanting to set up a session, but that is getting rescheduled, that is getting delayed. See, those are things which I'm sure every organization would have. But I would say that buy-in and ownership should be first thing before even you talk or communicate to the larger organization.
Yeah, no, excellent point, because it's perhaps that the homework or the strength in that phase of the launch makes it how good or bad it will become in terms of its success. So let's now go and talk about uh, how do you, I like your last point about sustaining it, because it should not be a one and done. You've done one time and then people forgot about it, or there were this handful of leaders who were very open and therefore they did it, but now it's kind of a dead story. So how do we evaluate, Manisha, the success of this kind of initiative, right? Do we measure it in terms of duration? Do we measure it to say that my leaders were X and now they are X and Y from what we have taught? Do we create forums where they go out and go back and teach back, right? In the traditional sense, some of these programs are done where. So what are the ways in which we can evaluate that, we've been successful, and anything any stories or anything that you can share there?
I would say, yeah, definitely. Metrics becomes very important always when we launch an initiative.
Yeah.
But my only take in the entire thing would be, Nikhil, that as an organization, we need to be a bit patient. As I said, when you're driving an initiative, which is more about a cultural change in the organization, right? While measuring the success becomes important, but in terms of the time, what you were mentioning, it will not happen that I have launched it today and it starts from tomorrow. This is my personal experience. Any initiative has to have a 6 months to a year incubation period where you actually start saying that now it has started giving me results. Yeah, this is what I had started with an intent and I'm really going to that intent. So if I go back to a traditional mentoring, okay, if I go back to a traditional mentoring, some of the success measures which we have used for traditional mentoring can be that what has been the engagement of mentor or mentee, or how many sessions we had, or if I've charted out a charter saying that a growth or a retention or a promotion where I've been able to achieve that for a mentee, right? That becomes a success measure in a traditional mentoring program. But now, if you look at a reverse mentoring program, as I said in the beginning of the discussion, at times it's a bit more subject oriented also, right? It's not like a generic discussion. So I would say that the success measure becomes very unique to an organization who's implementing it and the intent they have charted out. I can give you some examples, right?
Sure.
Like, for example, if you had said that my intent is to increase a social media awareness within my leaders are not very social media savvy. So I'm kind of leveraging my young talent to teach them more about social media branding. Then your success measure becomes that um, how how much comfortable your leaders are now with social media platform, how many posts they are doing, or are they really have started now attracting talent through social media, right? So that becomes your measure of success. I'm just giving you some examples. So that can be one way. Second, reverse mentoring one is also like, for example, if you have a small LGBTQ community, community. Okay. And suppose I'm using reverse mentoring to spread a larger message about some of this community or allyship in the organization, then how prevalent that concept is in the organization now? Or if I had 500 registration before, do I have 2,000 employees now joining that group, right? So some of those can be a measure of your reverse mentoring, okay? Or there can be other measures, like, for example, you continue to take regular feedback, right? Because it is very important when you launch a program, you are also launching certain surveys. I would not say like a survey, but some way of like quickly checking the pulse. Yeah. That can also become one of your measures, saying that whether employees or the leaders are really liking the concept. Fourth can also be like every organization has some way of capturing their employee feedback, a voice of employee, right? And there are organizations who runs inclusivity index also as a part of the engagement. So do you see an improvement in your inclusivity index? Because it also, creates a much inclusive organization. So I would say, I'm just giving an example, but I would say that as an organization, why you are doing it, which group you're addressing, which skill set you're addressing, your success measures eventually links to that. And that's how you need to start monitoring. But going back to my first statement, that we need to have that patience, saying that, this would not happen overnight. We need to run this program for some time to actually start seeing that change and the impact.
Sure. No, I think you make a good case that it's very contextual, right? Where if you are a large kind of a legacy kind of an organization, and maybe the leaders are very competent functional leaders, but have been kind of as they say, are you a digital migrant versus digital? There were three terms that I read recently where you say that you are a digital immigrant versus a digital native, or somewhere in between, right? So that could be one way of kind of saying that I move the needle from one to the other. Other could be diversity and creating that awareness. So in your experience, is that generally 6 months, a year, 2 years? Or again, I know that it's pretty subjective, but what's I don't know if there's a typical, atypical, but how many perhaps batches, or even that may not be the right word, like how many iterations would you have to do to say that now we can successfully say that this is a bench of leaders, we've gotten them from one to the other? But you're right, like there isn't a way to say that we're going to promote them because of this kind of an initiative, right? So curious to know, is there a duration, or what have you seen, or what have you read?
Difficult to come up with a specific duration, Nikhil, I would say, but definitely not less than 6 months. I would say that any initiative you launch, you actually take first 3 months to create awareness about that initiative, because if you look at organization today, an email readership may range from 5 to 7%. Today, all organizations are struggling that I kind of continue to communicate, but employees don't read, or employees, because there are multiple things which is going on in an organization, multiple communication. So I would say that a 6 months to a year, it's a good time frame. While again, I said it depends upon how you have launched it, but a 6 months to a year can become a good time frame where you start even thinking of saying that, okay, let me start looking at the impact it is creating. The longer, the better.
Sure, of course. All right. So Manisha, I have two final questions. One, of course, is to say that you've talked about the distinction. We've spoken about why it makes sense. We've spoken about some potential hurdles that could be there. So what's your advice? I mean, if there's an HR leader listening, or if there is a business leader listening, what could be a couple of things that you would say that they should either do and don't do from their perspective if they're thinking about it, in addition to everything that you've just shared? And then maybe even to the younger Gen Zer, right? To say that, okay, if you're lucky enough to be in a reverse mentoring kind of a initiative, right? What are some of the do's and don'ts from their perspective? So one, from the leadership team, HR, business, what are the things that they should think about and not think about? And then similarly on this side.
Okay. So maybe I can start with the leadership, and most of it we have actually touched upon.
Yeah, sure.
But I think from a HR or a business leadership perspective, as I said, the business buy-in becomes the most important thing, okay, when you're launching this initiative, and that should be done before. Imagine a situation, you are running a reverse mentoring program and your president or the managing director of the organization comes and joins the program just to listen into. I think the impact it creates, trust me, no other communication or branding would create that. So my suggestion would be that leadership buy-in, where the leadership and that I'm talking the topmost layer, while you may be doing it with the second rung of leadership, you may be targeting a second rung of leadership, or middle management, or senior middle management, but your investment should be from the topmost layer of the organization, right? So I think for me, that becomes the most important thing. Second, this is my experience, Nikhil. I have given a lot of importance to the branding of an initiative, in the work what I have done, because I always feel that, we do the multiple things which happens, and as an employer into multiple priorities. If there is no strong branding, if there is no strong recall, if there's no continuous communication, some of this initiative, dies its own death, or people don't even realize the things which are happening in the organization. So I think that branding and communication becomes equally important as an organization when you're driving it. And thirdly, I would say that, if you're a very large organization, okay, you don't have to boil the ocean, okay?
Yeah.
You can start with small pilot groups itself. Because at times, it also depends upon your organization culture, your organization dynamics, and it's not a one-size-fits-all strategy, right? Even within organization, you have multiple business groups which may have a different culture or different requirement, right? So I would say that, you can start with, small groups, create your reverse mentoring champions, who can help you run some of these initiatives. And, basis a success, you can take it to the larger organization. Some of these things, as I again said, that, it completely depends upon the organization DNA, but some of these things helps you, when you're kind of doing it for the first time and you want to do it right.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Yeah. So I really like the homework up front and the branding, really wanting to position that this is a very serious initiative. And again, if you're a very global organization, a large organization, you always can have subcultures of different businesses or even teams. Can you pilot it, right? And a lot of times that's what it takes. Maybe a success in one part of the organization that becomes a way to spread it in other parts of the organization. Now, what about the Gen Z? If I'm the one chosen to be a mentor at this young age, what are the things that I should be careful about, or some of the do's and don'ts there?
See, I think from a Gen Z perspective, one thing, when we choose a younger population, a younger employee, a younger talent, or a Gen Z as a mentor, so you are respecting the subject matter experience.
So how do you even choose that? That's, sorry to interrupt, but maybe you can, yeah, talk to that.
So it depends how you choose that. Like for example, assume as an organization, you want to do something different in the AI ML front, or in chat. Now there's a chat GPT everywhere, right? Yeah. You want to do something very different in artificial intelligence. I'm just thinking that, again, it becomes very organization driven. Yeah. But as an organization, you would know that these are group. Like for example, suppose as an organization, you are regularly going to campuses, right? You have a very strong campus program. And when you bring in those campus students, you would also have a very strong engagement program, right? As a part of the engagement program, you would know that this group of students, they're very group in this technology, and this is what they're aspiring to, or they have an interest, or they're into some research paper, because you know how the profile of the new generation is, right? So when as an organization, I have exposure to those insights, right? Then I would know that, okay, wow, as an organization, if I'm trying to do something in this technology area, then maybe I can leverage some of my young talent to, talk to the senior leaders about some of those technology areas. I'm not being very specific, Nikhil, over here.
No, but I think you make a good point, where if you know that if you're hiring, let's say, 5,000 people every year, like, what are you putting them in for? Is it largely tech roles? Is it sales and organization? What is it, right? And then that way you can kind of see, where is the fit, and then how do you take, a strata which you can say that these are the core skills that they bring. Yeah, so that makes.
And also, another way is like, today a lot of organizations. So we have different networks, right? Like you would have a women network, you would have other parenting network, for example. There are organizations who have early career networks, right? As a part of early career networks, you would have like-minded people who are like primarily Gen Z or young talent coming together, and they talk about different subjects. So to your question that how do you even identify? So you tax those networks, right? Saying that, okay, that what kind of discussions they're doing, what kind of interest areas they have, and if kind of matches with the organization priority, then you definitely check their interest, that whether they would be interested to mentor some senior leaders or take a session for the senior leaders. So that how it happens in a very practical context.
Sure.
Um,
Right.
okay.
Okay.
And
Please,
yeah.
please.
No, and to the other question of yours, Nikhil, saying that what becomes do's and don'ts for
Yeah,
them.
what should they be careful about?
I think, we kind of, we select them from a subject matter perspective, right? So I think while they may have a fair understanding, but for them to get into a mentoring kind of a level, they need to be very, very thorough in terms of, of the subject, of the knowledge, so that, when they're out there for that session or for that discussion, they can do complete justice. And as an organization, because see, they need to be also careful that, today, if the leaders are investing their time, it has to be a very mutually beneficial section, right? So I think they need to bring in that seriousness, which, basis my experience, Nikhil, most of them are very, very serious, very, very excited, very, very motivated to go and drive the difference in the larger organization. But that becomes very, very important. See, it should not become a very shallow discussion, right? Then, people would not kind of encourage such sessions of mentoring programs.
But do you groom them in some way, just as a kind of a, for the lack of better, like an orientation to say that, because I may have a sense of nervousness in me that, here I am, I'm only 20 something. There's a person on the other side with 30 years of experience or 25 years of experience, I'm shaking or whatever. I don't know, maybe not everyone has that inhibition, but what are the ways in which we can make sure that, as you rightly said, becomes a very fruitful engagement?
Yeah. See, I'll tell you, this is my experience, and I've not come across nervous group, okay, because this profile is super confident, okay. So they will be super confident to go and win the world, okay. So it's not that they're nervous about going in front of leaders, but I think they need a lot of grooming in terms of how to present.
Yeah.
Because it's in terms of, because at times what happened, they have their own way of communicating and presenting, right? But how do you create that business case? How do you tell a business story? That is something which, this is my experience, Nikhil. Now there can be other views as well. I have seen where they need maximum coaching. So when we leaders, we identify a group and we identify a topic, and then we start spending our time with them before we do the actual session, I think that's where the maximum coaching happens. Like, how do you tell the story? So if you have 45 minutes, how do you structure the conversation? How do you get the best of the impact out while they would have all the content with them? They would be they would have the content, they would be very confident. There is no issue in the English communication, but the storytelling is something which I have not seen everyone very comfortable with.
Correct. And even how they use perhaps the medium of communication, right? I mean, that's a I have heard stories where them sending a WhatsApp message is equal to communicated, and here you have on the other side the person is expecting an email. I've actually seen in companies where real client meetings where they send message to clients via WhatsApp. But you're right. I think that common denominator needs to be established before before they bring the two. Okay, so one final question, Manisha, is that obviously you've with all your experience, such vast experience, right? What have you seen? I mean, certainly from the organization that you've been part, even just in the wider HR fraternity, the prevalence of reverse mentoring, right, in organizations, right, and what can be the message there in terms of how what are the benefits from what you've done?
Sure, Nikhil. So I think in terms of the prevalence, I would say that if I look at, I see organization in the different stages of learning. And also, it may happen that organizations are doing similar things, but may not be calling reverse mentoring, to be very fair, right? Sure. So, but I do see organization in a different stages of learning in introducing such initiative. But my personal belief is, Nikhil, the way the skill sets are changing, the way the business dynamics are changing, reverse mentoring is very soon going to be the DNA for our intergenerational learning or collaboration. The organizations were still not implemented. Very soon they will start leveraging the benefit of the program. That's how I see it. Maybe I'll reference one of the Economic Times article which came, a month back, where some of the organizations were also talking about, how the different practices of reverse mentoring. For example, Merck Pharmaceutical, they spoke specifically about saying that they had identified social media as a coaching. And at any point of time, they have 10 to 12 leaders who goes through that social media coaching. And they see the difference in terms of when people are more active on that platform. Because today organizations are also looking at that as a medium to hire talent, right? So we want our leaders to get into. I've also read about PNG. PNG also used reverse mentoring a lot for their leadership to, kind of get insights on the latest technology. And from a Honeywell perspective, just to briefly mention, since I have spent most of my tenure over there, I was personally involved in launching this program at Honeywell. And we have also used a mix of, technology trends as well as social media coaching to kind of orient our leadership team and learn from our young generation. So maybe what I would say, Nikhil, I would want to sum it up by saying that if you look at the profile of a young generation, okay, two things becomes very, very important for them. One is the workplace flexibility, okay, and the second is a sense of purpose. These are the two things which this group, gives a lot of importance to. And reverse mentoring in true sense helps you to drive that inclusivity or a sense of belonging or a larger, attachment to the engagement or attachment to the organization. So from that perspective, I think organizations who are doing it, they should continue to do the good work. Organizations who are yet to implement, they should look at it as a very strong lever to engage and retain their young workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a great way to kind of close out the message in terms of, the talent landscape is going to change. I mean, you have on one end, as we talk about generations, the boomer generation, which is extending its kind of work years. You have Gen Zers who are coming into the workplace. Again, a lot of their jobs are also being kind of challenged with AI and ML, yet they bring a very different context, a different perspective of how they're seeing the world. And the nature of problems itself has become so very complex and changed, right? So the learning agility is really critical on both sides. And here you have a chance to learn something from the younger generation. So this has been one great conversation, Manisha. I've really enjoyed it. And thank you for sharing and shedding light on a topic perhaps it's been, as you rightly said, maybe it's been implemented in different versions of it, but it was good to know from you, from your experience of, what are the foundation sort of basic things that one needs to put in place? What are some of the hurdles? What do we do to measure its success, and why it's so relevant? So I'm deeply grateful. I hope that all our HR leaders, our business leaders can take a few cues from our conversation, and certainly the Gen Zers who can also say that, look, you're quite welcome and eagerly welcome into a organization, because you also have a lot to contribute. So once again, Manisha, it's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. And at some point, if our travels converge, I look forward to meeting you in person. Take care and thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nikhil. It was an absolute pleasure for me also, having this discussion with you. And I'm hoping that, our larger audience find it helpful. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye.